Actually, unfortunately, our first speaker that's on the program, Jim Jordan, President of Jim Jordan Associates, was unable to join us today. However, I'm pleased to introduce Mark Berggren as our first speaker. Mark is the Managing Director of Methanol Markets Services Asia. He's based in Singapore. And MMSA and Jim Jordan Associates have a strategic partnership to provide consulting services to the global methanol industry. Mark formed MMSA in 2004 and has worked in Asia since 1998 for a broad array of clients. He also spent more than a decade working for Shell. It's my pleasure to introduce my good friend, Mark Berggren.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you for inviting Jim. Jim had a family emergency, and he is very sorry that he can't make it. I think that Jim is obviously well known in the U.S. I've worked with Jim for the last 5 years very closely, and we follow methanol markets and ethanol markets around the world in our multi-client publications that some of you in this room know about. One thing that is happening that's very, very clear around the world, not just in the United States, is that methanol is becoming a means for people to replace crude oil and crude oil products. In China, where I've spent quite a bit of time, there is a very active set of activities and commercial activity which takes coal and leverages their huge advantage in coal to via methanol to replace gasoline. And in a country that is starved for BTUs, this is a very important strategic element they have. And in thinking about the United States, we have somewhat of a similar situation with our position with natural gas. So there is some good analogy, I believe, between what's happening in Asia, which, by the way, is based on U.S. technology, and what could happen here in the United States and North America, for that matter. Okay. I will try to keep this short and sweet. I know not everybody here has a technical background. Maybe some of you aren't even familiar with the methanol markets. But what I'll talk about is the conventional approach we've been considering to take methanol and replace or substitute gasoline. And recently we've heard a lot more about using methanol in ternary blends with ethanol and gasoline. And we'll just look at prices and we'll discuss economics. I think the economics actually look very good for methanol at this point. The second area is going to be talking about methanol to gasoline. Methanol to gasoline is a technology that kind of obviates the need to invest in, let's say, methanol distribution infrastructure. The idea is you take methanol and convert it mostly to gasoline, and you produce a little bit of LPG along with that. And there are some technologies being advanced that they're actually developed several decades ago that now also look economically attractive. So I'll touch on that before closing with a few thoughts. What you see here is a progression of pricing for methanol, which is the blue line on the bottom, ethanol, which is the green line in the middle, and then U.S. Gulf Coast basis regular gasoline, which is on the top. And what is very clear, in the last 3 years, the average price for methanol is significantly below that of ethanol and especially gasoline. Now, as we were told in the introductory remarks, of course, the energy content inside of gasoline is much higher than it is in methanol, but even with adjustments, you still have a much lower cost source of BTU. And this is a very important concept. This is what's driving substitution of gasoline for methanol in China right now. By the same token, ethanol prices, even adjusted, are higher in terms of energy than methanol. And it's not just a temporary situation. This has happened the last 3 years. And I would argue that the conditions that created this are set to persist for the foreseeable future. Doing a little bit of what-if analysis, and Jim put this together, basically showing, what if we were able to replace all of the ethanol, and we're not talking about any subsidization here, just based on these average price. If we could keep this average price spread the same over the next few years and replace ethanol, you start to generate very large numbers. And of course, you can argue that this won't happen overnight, but we are talking about billions of dollars here. So it is something that really needs to be discussed and made clear. Do we really want to not consider this advantage? Now let me move on to methanol to gasoline. This is a technology that uses very fancy catalysts, which are basically metals that can convert methanol into gasoline molecules. So the beauty of this is, okay, if you don't want to deal with methanol, we'll give you methanol, we'll just give you gasoline. And ExxonMobil has developed technology that is now being used in China as well that works very well. And it looks, again, given the spreads we have between natural gas and coal versus crude, that it will work economically. So this is Jim's question. Will it happen in the U.S.? It could happen. Certainly, as you will see this data, there is an economic incentive for MTG. We have to maintain that spread, and there's a bit of differences in the type of investment that you need for these two approaches. I guess I'm going to show the laser over here. But let me just explain the process. I'll try to keep this very simple. You can take a hydrocarbon, and it could be coal or it could be natural gas, and you make methanol with that, and then using this catalyst, you make gasoline. And along with the gasoline, you make some LPG. But of course, LPG is a commodity that's tradable and consumable as well. As I mentioned, there was a facility in New Zealand, which I believe is fully dismantled now, and some of which has been sent to China, actually. And then China is using coal-based methanol to generate gasoline by this method. So when we look at the raw economics of this, we have to take in consideration the feedstock, which in the case of the U.S. would be, we're going to start from methanol, and then we're going to look at the values of the products as well, gasoline and LPG. And here again, now we're looking back 5 years, or let's say 4+ years. And we've got a little bit of a busy chart here. The blue line on the bottom is the methanol contract price in the U.S. Gulf. The red line on top is the gasoline price. And the green line is butane, which is a proxy for LPG value. And then the black line is using the conversion that I just showed. You calculate how much methanol is required. The cost of that methanol, is the converted value of that methanol is the price of methanol that allows you to make gasoline from this process and be competitive with regular gasoline. And what you can see for a majority of the period since 2007, had you had a facility like this operational, you could have either sold methanol at a price higher or you could have recouped some value of methanol above the market price by making gasoline. We have very similar analysis for this for methanol to olefins. Any of you who follow the methanol industry will know that methanol to olefins is a very commercially successful technology, again, being developed in China. So this gives you a flavor for the potential for methanol. Of course, that spread is going to have to finance a lot of capital investment, but that's another topic. This simply clarifies the difference. There's about 18 cents per gallon difference between the value of methanol making gasoline via MTG and the methanol market prices. And as I mentioned, a lot of what's driving this is the spread between crude oil and natural gas. I'm going to skip over a couple slides. When we look at the converted value, even on a shorter period of time, where we take away the noise from the first 2 years, that differential becomes even greater. And a lot of the reason that methanol prices spiked in the earlier years, in the 2007-2008 timeframe, was due to some supply disruptions that were unexpected, and that it really have not happened since. So looking at crude oil now, we can normalize methanol's value in dollars per million BTU versus natural gas, which is widely traded, and crude oil. And you can see that methanol, by and large, follows the crude oil price closely over a long enough period of time. In short periods of time, it's kind of dangerous because things move, they have separate market drivers. But over time, they've been following each other. And as I mentioned earlier, I believe the conditions for this spread that you see here look to persist for some time. So, summarizing, methanol is the cheapest of the major alcohols, certainly lower cost, even when adjusting for energy value than ethanol. We think that MTG economics look good. And for the most part, methanol prices track crude. And as that spread continues, these opportunities will continue to look good. And as a result of that, we see some very serious activities for MTG projects here in the U.S. One thing I'd like to add to this is that, and it was touched on by Greg, one of the most important things for methanol to become successful as a fuel, in my opinion, is deliverability. It's all well and good to say that it can do all these things, but when the orders start coming in, the industry is going to have to be able to supply. And certainly it's going to take some bold decisions to get there. China has taken some of those bold decisions and is now able to have a little bit more independence in their energy choice. And it's up to the U.S. to take those same decisions. So that's all I have to say for now. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Our next speaker is Mike Herz. Mike is Vice President of Marketing and Logistics, Asia Pacific at Methanex Corporation, leading its offices in Hong Kong, Shanghai, Tokyo, Seoul, and Beijing. Mr. Herz is a member of the Methanex Corporation's Global Leadership Council. He also serves as Vice Chairman of the Methanol Institute's Board of Directors. Prior to this, Mr. Herz served as Director of Global Supply Chain and Strategic Market Planning, Director of Corporate Development, and held various senior financial positions at the Methanex Corporation. And before joining Methanex in 1995, Mr. Herz held financial management roles at Coopers & Lybrand and BC Gas, Inc. It's my pleasure to introduce my board's Vice Chairman, Mike Herz.
Thank you, Greg. It's my privilege to be here today. This was just a concept at our board meeting in Singapore for the Methanol Institute last November. And here today I look out on a number of distinguished guests, all focused on methanol. I think that's a great thing for our industry. I'd like to wish everyone here a successful day. I hope it's informative, and hope that I can add something to it as well. Our CEO really wanted to be here today. He had a commitment to be in South America. So instead of our CEO, you have someone whose day-to-day job is selling methanol speaking to you. I'll try to do my best. There's other experts in the room from Methanex who I will draw on to help me in the Q&A session. Just want to focus on the photo that's on this slide. That's a tri-fuel vehicle. Can run, it's designed by Lotus, engineered by Lotus, can run on any combination of methanol, ethanol, and gasoline. I'm going to present on really three things: the benefits of methanol for the U.S. fuel pool, the impact of shale gas on North American methanol production. I'm going to talk about what's going on around the world and the use of methanol fuel, particularly with a focus on what's happening in China. And I'll conclude with some initiatives that we think would help to capture this opportunity for the U.S. Can I flip to the next slide?
Mark, get the clicker.
So which one moves it? Next. I have a habit of pressing the wrong button on these things and stalling everything. We're a public company, so I'll just quickly put up this disclaimer. Need to remind you that the presentation contains forward-looking statements and that the outcome, because of the risks and uncertainties of those estimates, may vary from the estimate. So on one slide here, I've got a picture of Methanex, and really tries to show our global reach and supply chain on one page. Methanex is the world leading supplier of methanol. We're headquartered in Vancouver, Canada. That's a picture of our CEO right beside Vancouver. Our production facilities are in the picture. Those are located in Canada, Egypt, Chile, Trinidad and Tobago, and New Zealand. We have sales offices, storage and distribution facilities in all major regions of the world. And the orange arrows kind of show our major trade flows. We use our captive shipping company, Waterfront Shipping, to move the methanol. Overall, we have about a 15% global market share, as well as leading shares in major geographies. Here in the US or here in North America, our market share is around 40%. Our company focuses on only one thing, that's methanol production and marketing. And in 2011, our revenue was about $2.6 billion, with only 1,000 employees worldwide. We're actively supporting new energy uses of methanol through industry and government collaboration. I'll talk about that a bit more later. And as you can see, we're on the ground with several offices in China, and that'll give me hopefully a chance to talk with some knowledge about the China fuel blending story. So put here, methanol is an attractive fuel. The study on the right-hand side of the slide is a study, The Future of Natural Gas, from MIT, 2010. I believe our panelist beside me, Dan Cohn, will talk more about this. A couple quotes there that come from the study. I just want to highlight a couple of points that some have already been said, but key things from the study. Methanol is competitive with gasoline and diesel, whether you look at that on a volume, price per volume basis or a price per mile traveled basis. It's a liquid fuel, high octane and highly efficient. I just want to stress liquid. I've seen something recently, the world has lots of energy, but what we don't have a lot of is liquid transportation fuels, so methanol can fill that gap. It's easy to implement in fuel, as a fuel. There's no known technical barriers. And it's clean, safe, and a low emission fuel when you do that. We get some common objections. David Sandalo referred to those with respect to the properties of methanol. It is toxic, it is corrosive. There are simple and proven ways to deal with that. And I'm going to leave that for other members on the panel with more of a technical background to explain. You've seen this slide. I think you're going to see it a number of times today, so I won't leave it up here for long. This is really highlighting the disconnect that has emerged between natural gas prices and crude oil prices. And you can see the red line on this graph is natural gas price, the blue lines representing crude oil. Historically, we saw that relationship, natural gas price to crude oil price, being about 6 times, with oil prices per barrel being about 6 times the natural gas price per million British thermal units. Today it's over 20. This prediction goes out to 2009, and it's from Wood Mackenzie, a view that the natural gas market supply and demand situation will be such that that will continue into the future. That provides an opportunity that makes methanol production in North America attractive, and that's where I'll go next on this presentation. And it also provides that opportunity to transform low-cost natural gas into high-value liquid fuel. So on the production side, people are returning. Methanol production is returning to North America. And maybe to highlight that, I'll just give a bit of history. In the early 1990s, North America produced about 10 million tons of methanol, about 40% of global methanol demand at that point in time. Between then and 2010, gas prices in North America became relatively high, and people invested in offshore methanol production in places with low-cost natural gas. Led to a situation where by 2010 in the US we had 1 million tons of methanol production capacity, which was about 2% of global methanol demand. The pendulum is swinging back. Natural gas prices in North America today are among the lowest in the world, and that's from the emergence of shale gas. We have restarted this facility in Canada last year in 2011. It's a 500,000 ton facility. Next to follow will be a plant in Beaumont, Texas, a competitor's plant, which will start later this year, 850,000 tons. There's another plant in Texas, a Lyondell plant, another 800,000 tons, and it's slated to restart in 2013. That's not the end of it. We have another project. Methanex has another project. We are looking to, we've recently announced that we secured this site that's pictured here in Geismar, Louisiana, and we're looking to relocate one idled 1 million ton methanol plant from Chile, where we're gas constrained, to Louisiana, doing the work now to make a final investment decision later this year, and if successful, that plant would restart in 2014, so a 1 million ton plant. The U.S. Gulf Coast, very attractive for this, has skilled workers, a positive business environment, and we're very excited about it. This project alone would generate about 1,500 construction jobs during the construction phase for 2 years, and long-term, high-skilled employment of around 130 to 150 jobs. Sorry, 1 second. So this slide shows a little bit, some pictures of what's happening with methanol as energy around the world. Methanol and gasoline blending is primarily occurring in China, but there's also many other countries around the world which are implementing methanol fuels. In Europe, we've seen low-level methanol blends, 1 to 2%. In the UK, in Iceland, and in the Netherlands, methanol is being blended at low percentages into gasoline. The picture in the top left is a 100% methanol-fueled car in China. My boss is standing beside it, and I got a chance to drive that last year. Shanghai Maple is producing those. In the middle, we see Australia. The Australian government is supporting fuel blending of methanol. In Europe, on the bottom left, you see that there's a focus on air quality benefits of methanol, and there's projects there to have methanol replace diesel in ships, so that we can meet those air quality benefits. The methanol burns cleaner. You can manufacture methanol at scale from renewable sources. So there's a route to methanol that was talked about in David Sandelow's comments that doesn't require fossil fuels, and a couple of these pictures deal with that. On the top right, from Iceland, we have CRI, Carbon Recycling Inc., methanol plant that takes CO2 and converts to methanol. We have BioMCN pictured on the race car on the bottom right of this picture, and they produce methanol can produce methanol from glycerin, which is a byproduct of biodiesel production. In North America, a company called Enerchem, it's not on the slide, has a project where they take municipal solid waste and produce liquid fuels from that. Just want to switch to China and talk about that. Several years ago, a group of experts in China had a vision to convert abundant, low-cost inland coal to liquid fuel via methanol. I'm happy to see two of these men here today. With us are Mr. Wang Maolin and Governor Pang. They're over to my right. And their vision and drive made methanol fuel a reality in China. Driven by a desire to upgrade coal value, have energy independence, and develop the west of China, the program developed over time with government support, research, trial programs, and standards development. And today, China is leading the world in the use of methanol. We see the fueling stations here on the right. Those are in Shanxi, and they have M85 marked on the pump, M85 gasoline. There's also diesel methanol at that site. The fastest growing methanol markets in the world are applications where methanol replaces petroleum products. So methanol blending with gasoline, olefins for plastics and fibers, dimethyl ether and biodiesel. The graphic on the left here, the green part is methanol fuel use in China. This is about a 10-year time frame, doesn't show up well, but over the 10-year time frame, China has moved to have half of their methanol demand, something like 12 million tons on this slide, from methanol going into fuel uses. I have a slide here that the purpose of this slide is really to illustrate similarities between China and the US with respect to the benefits of methanol use as fuel. So obviously the first one, we have a desire in both countries to reduce dependence on oil imports. We have an abundant source of feedstock that has a cost less than oil. In the case of China, that's coal. Here in the US now, with the supply from shale gas, it's natural gas. Many people have talked about it, but today, without a subsidy, methanol is lower cost on a volume or per mile driven basis than gasoline. And there's a potential for low carbon emission methanol. I talked about the earlier. The production of methanol is possible at scale from non-fossil fuels, and it's realistic. And desire for job creation as you build methanol plants and as the cost of energy comes down is supported by methanol. So in conclusion, we have an abundant, low-cost natural gas supply in North America. It can be converted to methanol, which is a competitive liquid fuel. Methanol fuels are technically and commercially proven and can also be produced at scale from renewable sources. So we know alcohol fuels work. Methanol is the lowest cost liquid fuel. Now we need regulations that allow methanol to compete on a level playing field, such as the Open Fuel Standards Act, so that the consumer can choose. We also need continued research into the use of methanol fuels to leverage even greater benefits from methanol's unique properties. I know Dan is going to talk about those as we go forward. The EPA once led the world in this area and can once again play a leading role to reduce America's fuel costs and to reduce dependence on foreign oil. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Our next speaker is Dan Cohn. Dan is the Senior Research Scientist and Head of the Plasma Technology Division of the Plasma Science and Fusion Center at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Dr. Cohn joined MIT in 1971 as a research staff member and now serves as a Senior Research Scientist with the MIT Nuclear Engineering Department. Dr. Cohn was co-founder of Integrated Environmental Technologies, Inc., a commercial company that provides plasma furnace systems for environmentally protective conversion of waste into hydrogen and other valuable products. Dan is also the lead author of the MIT paper on the future of natural gas that Mike just cited. It's my great pleasure to introduce Dan Cohn.
Thank you, Greg. I'd like to talk about the opportunity for methanol use as an alternative fuel for heavy-duty vehicles. There's a large potential market here. The heavy-duty vehicles in the U.S. consume about 2.5 million barrels of oil per day. And the heavy-duty area is an area that's very important for national security. Heavy-duty trucks are essential for commerce in the United States. And another factor is that projections for diesel fuel use worldwide indicate that the demand is going to go up very rapidly, much more rapidly than gasoline. So it's quite possible that there'll be greater tightness in the diesel fuel market than in the gasoline market. Now at MIT, we've looked at various aspects of using methanol in vehicles, and one important element has been the study we did on natural gas, which was referred to earlier. And by the way, Greg, I appreciate the kind remark you made about my role in the natural gas study. But I was the executive director, but wasn't the lead author. Just want to be correct here. Now, this study was a 2-year study in which we looked at all aspects of the future of natural gas: supply, demand, infrastructure, geopolitics. And when we started this study, which was in 2008, people were just starting to talk about the potential of shale gas. And we weren't sure that this was real. But it wasn't long after we started the study that it became clear that shale gas was really here to stay and would have a tremendous impact. That we had a source of low-cost natural gas in the United States that would have very significant implications. And that increased our emphasis in the natural gas study on looking to see how shale gas could be used in transportation. So we looked at various ways in which natural gas could be used for cars and trucks. We looked at CNG, we looked at LNG, and we looked at various fuels that could be produced by converting natural gas into liquid fuel. As Mike mentioned, for example, gasoline from the MTG process, diesel by Fischer-Tropsch, and also methanol. And our conclusion was methanol had significant cost and greenhouse gas emission advantages. And for this reason, we emphasized looking at methanol in the study. We looked at methanol use in both light and heavy-duty vehicles. Heavy-duty vehicles have the attraction that the impact from use, a given amount of impact, can be much larger per vehicle and per fueling station. You don't need as many vehicles and fueling stations, in fact, far fewer, to reduce oil dependence by a certain amount. So that's an advantage of heavy-duty fuel use. There are advantages, of course, of use in light-duty vehicles, but it's important, we thought, to look at both areas of application. Now, in looking at the opportunities for using methanol in heavy-duty vehicles, our conclusion was that the most effective way to use it would be in heavy-duty engines that use spark ignition rather than compression ignition, and that engines that can operate flex fuel. And we heard about the importance of flex fuel and fuel choice earlier. Using this approach, it's possible to obtain the same fuel efficiency and torque as a diesel engine at a lower cost. The cost of the vehicle relative to a diesel vehicle could be reduced by at least $10,000. And one of the major reasons for this is that the exhaust treatment system for a spark ignition methanol fuel vehicle is much simpler and less expensive than for a diesel vehicle. In addition, the engine can be much smaller, around 40% smaller in size. An additional advantage that a methanol-fueled heavy-duty vehicle can have relative to a diesel vehicle is lower emissions, because the exhaust system is simpler and more effective. In addition, more power can be obtained because the engine can be run at a higher RPM. Now, these engines can be produced from modified diesel engines, or from modified spark ignition natural gas truck engines. And in fact, at the EPA labs, Matt Brewster and company, a number of years ago, showed how you could modify a diesel engine and get, under spark ignition operation, diesel-like efficiency operating with methanol. Now, the reason this capability is possible is methanol has a exceptionally strong resistance to engine knock. That's unwanted detonation of the engine. And this capability is especially strong when the fuel is directly injected in the engine rather than injected in the manifold, as is the case for conventional engines. However, direct injection engines are now starting to emerge in large quantities with light-duty vehicles. And it's well established that direct injection has important advantages in terms of efficiency, torque, and engine size. And the reason direct injection is so effective is when the fuel is directly injected into the engine as a liquid, it provides a tremendous evaporative cooling, and that reduces the propensity of the engine to knock, self-detonate. And what this is equivalent to is having a fuel that has an extremely high octane. What octane means is the ability to resist knock. And when methanol is directly injected into an engine, the effective octane is over 140 octane numbers compared to 93 octane number for premium gasoline. So it's a very large improvement and very unique to methanol and to a lesser degree ethanol. And what this capability does is it allows a higher compression ratio and higher pressure turbocharged operation in not only methanol engines, but in engines that have quite a bit of gasoline, because even though the gasoline doesn't have the high octane, a relatively modest amount of methanol mixed with it can provide a fuel with sufficient knock resistance. So because of the high compression ratio and the high degree of turbocharging in the engine, this makes possible a very high torque per liter, on the order of 60% more torque per liter. And because of this, a smaller engine can provide the same torque and horsepower as a much larger engine. This table shows illustrative features of a heavy-duty truck operated with methanol in a flex fuel mode. Two cases are shown. One is for M100, 100% methanol, and the other is for M30, 30% methanol, 70% gasoline. And the methanol fueled truck is compared to a diesel heavy-duty truck, a big long-haul truck. The typical engine size for a diesel for heavy-duty operation is 15 liter. In comparison, a methanol flex fuel engine with spark ignition can achieve the same torque and horsepower with 9 liters, 40% smaller engine. And this results in a significant reduction in engine weight. Engine weight is a very important factor. Typical diesel engine system, which includes the diesel and the exhaust treatment system, weighs around 3,400 pounds. Whereas if one could obtain the same torque and efficiency with a methanol flex fuel engine, the weight could be reduced to about 1,800 pounds. So it's a 1,600 pound decrease. Now the exhaust treatment systems are quite a bit different, as I mentioned earlier. Diesel engines, in order to meet emissions requirements, use what's called selective catalytic reduction, which is represented by SCR. And that requires a tank of urea, which is sprayed into the exhaust. It's a complicated system, and this tank of urea has to be refilled periodically. In addition, the diesel engine has to have a filter that absorbs its soot. And this adds substantial cost and also takes up substantial volume. On the other hand, with a spark ignition engine, which is like the engine you have in your car, gasoline vehicle, the exhaust system is a very simple one. It's a three-way catalytic converter. It's much lighter, much simpler, much less expensive. And that three-way catalyst not only provides lower cost, but capability for more robust emissions control if desired. So as a consequence of the smaller engine, and more importantly, the simpler exhaust system, the cost of a methanol and flex fuel engine would be at least $10,000 less than the comparable diesel. And that's, of course, an important incentive for people to want to make the switch, the upfront cost savings. In addition, there's a substantial fuel cost savings per year. And we worked out some illustrative numbers of the fuel cost savings for two cases. One is, assume that methanol is provided at the spot price, and that methanol is essentially imported methanol. For methanol at the present spot price, there would be around a 70-cent per diesel gallon equivalent cost savings from using methanol instead of diesel. However, as it's been pointed out earlier, the capability for using low-cost U.S. natural gas with state-of-the-art plants could bring that cost savings up to a higher number. As an example, $1.20 per diesel gallon equivalent. So very significant cost savings could be obtained for M100. The cost saving could be as high as $15,000 per year. And this is for the case of a diesel long-haul truck that's driven 65,000 miles per year with 5 mile per gallon fuel consumption, thus using 13,000 gallons a year. And the savings is less in the case of M30, but still significant. The point is the driver would have their choice of using M30 or M100 or even mixing in ethanol, depending upon the availability and relative economics of these fuels. Now, one issue that's been talked about with regard to the drawbacks of methanol is that it has shorter range because of the smaller energy density compared to gasoline and diesel. The energy per unit volume in methanol is about 50% of that of gasoline and about 45% that of diesel. In a heavy-duty vehicle, though, this issue can be dealt with by using a larger fuel tank. There's room for increasing the fuel tank capacity. And even though there's additional weight from that additional fuel, the additional weight is more than offset by the smaller weight of the engine. In the last row, you can see that the illustrative range for the diesel is 1,000 miles. This is for a 200 gallon tank capacity. For M30, 30% methanol, 70% gasoline, the range is 1,130 miles. The tank capacity has been increased to 300 gallons, two 150-gallon tanks, which can fit readily in a diesel vehicle. And even in the case of M100, which has a low energy density, the range is almost 700 miles. So in summary, the use of methanol in flex fuel heavy trucks could provide both substantial upfront cost savings and large fuel cost savings. China could provide a ready market for this type of technology because as has been discussed, it already has the fueling infrastructure for methanol using coal-derived methanol. In the U.S., of course, we have the challenge that we don't have the methanol fueling infrastructure, and also the vehicles would need to be developed. So some initial government support could be needed, for example, for initial fleet demonstrations. But after that point, the compelling economics in terms of both the upfront cost savings and the fuel cost savings could start a use of methanol for heavy-duty vehicles that would be economically sustainable, would not require any subsidies. Now, my colleague at MIT, Leslie Bromberg, and I are preparing a paper on this, and it should be available in April. And finally, I'd like to say that this study of methanol in heavy-duty vehicles is part of a broad-based methanol in transportation program that we've established at MIT. And one of the aspects that we'll be studying is how it's possible to obtain a fuel efficiency that's even higher than a diesel, significantly higher than a diesel, by using the special properties of methanol. So we see a range of options for using methanol that we plan to explore. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Our final speaker in this panel is Eyal Aronoff. Eyal is the co-founder of the Fuel Freedom Foundation that promotes the blueprint for solving the oil price crisis by removing barriers to fuel competition via a grassroots effort. At the Fuel Freedom Project, fuel freedom means that gasoline, diesel, methanol, natural gas, ethanol, and electricity can compete on equal footing, both at the dealership and at the pump. Mr. Aronoff is also the co-founder of Quest Software. It's my pleasure to introduce Eyal Aronoff.
Good morning. Today we're going to talk about the size of the business opportunity in methanol fuel. And we think here that this is going to be, simply said, the largest business opportunity this decade. So in order to capitalize on this huge business opportunity, we have to look at methanol from the entire life cycle, from the feedstock to the processing to the distribution. How do we dispense it, and how do we drive on it? Okay, so here feedstock, you already know that it has a very diverse feedstock: natural gas, coals, municipal waste, biomass, and recycled CO2. We've seen examples of that already this morning. Okay, I'm going to focus just on natural gas here. This is the US natural gas production, monthly natural gas production numbers. As you can see, since 2005, there's been a rapid expansion of natural gas production in the US. And it looks like it's not going to end. As a matter of fact, we know that even today there are about 5,000 wells that have been drilled and not used because the price of natural gas has been affected by this oversupply. So let's look just at what happened between 2010 and 2011. We produced 1.7 trillion cubic feet of natural gas in addition to what we produced before. Okay? In today's depressed price, it's worth about $3.5 billion. Now, let's assume we take this and we convert it to methanol. We're going to get roughly 17 billion gallons of methanol, which is equivalent to basically 10 billion gallons of gasoline. Okay? 10 billion gallons of gasoline is worth $38 billion. So ladies and gentlemen, the profit margins here are gigantic. If this was a company, its profitability would have been twice as big as Walmart. And that represents a huge market opportunity. Now, Think about it this way. I only talked about the incremental production. 1 year incremental production. This 1 year incremental production replaces about 1.3 million barrels of oil a day, which is roughly 12% of our oil import. It's also roughly equivalent to our ethanol production. So we use about 40% of our corn production in the United States to get to this 10 billion gallons of gasoline equivalent. 40% of our corn production is converted to ethanol to get to this number. Here we are talking about 5%, and it's all new incremental, newly found gas. So when the profitability here is potential is so high, it opens opportunities to new type of processes. So let's look at that, okay? Where are we going to make this methanol? Well, in principle, we can make the methanol. Methanol is very easy to do through gasification. Now, we're talking about fuel methanol, not chemical methanol. To make chemical methanol, have to be a high-precision product. And Methanex are the best in the world at that. But fuel methanol does not have to be. It could be a cocktail of related products, just like gasoline is not any one product. It is a cocktail of many different carbohydrate components. So we can make that in the field. We can make it at the natural gas processing plant. We can make it at the hub, which is where the petrochemical industry exists today. But how about at the gas station? Can we make methanol at the gas station? Can we make methanol at the workplace? Can you guys make methanol at home? So let's talk a little bit about upstream processing, which means that we are making methanol either directly at the oil field or at the processing plant. So the methanol creation process is a relatively simple chemical transformation, and it can take up to 20 to 25% of the feedstock could be naturally occurring CO2 that comes out of the ground with the natural gas. So if you put that into the combustion chamber, into the gasification chamber, you can substantially boost the methanol yield and lower the carbon footprint of the fuel. So now instead of $38 billion gasoline equivalent, we have the potential of getting $45 billion from this $3.5 billion of natural gas. Okay. But of course, this will require methanol distribution system, which we don't have today. And the methanol properties, its corrosion and its corrosiveness, will make it hard to build it. I mean, you will need to adjust and convert the distribution system. So where will this be effective? Where the fields, the natural gas fields, are very close to populous area that you can basically track the methanol to, right? So where is that? Guess what? It's everywhere. This is our natural gas and natural gas processing picture today. And with the new finds of shale gas all over the Northeast, we are going to see natural gas processing moving up northeast. We are seeing natural gas processing going to start moving up the San Joaquin Valley in California. So it's everywhere, and it's very close to where the population is living. So that's definitely a doable strategy to convert at the natural gas processing plant or even in the field and track it to the cities. Okay. But how about if you live far away from where the natural gas is? Okay. How about creating methanol at the gas station? So we're looking at something like a container-sized gasifier that is connected to municipal water and municipal gas and creates methanol on demand, right? Methanol is, although a little bit toxic, it's not a hazardous waste. So you can make some on demand and you can store it at the container. You don't need to put an underground underground tank for that if you make it at the gas station. Now, of course, when you buy methanol, when you buy natural gas at the gas station, you don't get the $2.50 or $3 MMSA. You know, you get municipal gas rates, and commercial municipal gas rates can run up to around the $8 an MMSA, and actually have not budged, even though the price is going down. Nonetheless, you can produce methanol at about $1.50 a gallon. So think about the gas station owner. A gas station owner gets 1 or 2 cents profit per gallon of fuel they sell today. Most of the money in the gas business is on the convenience store. Here they can sell this probably for 15, 20, or maybe 30 cents profit. This could be a fantastic solution for them. Although this price is not competitive with methanol that is produced by Methanex on a large scale, because the margins between gasoline and methane is so big, you can have suboptimal solutions penetrating the market and still be successful. Okay, how about driving? We need to be able to drive on methanol. So first of all, people talked about the open fuel standard. Open fuel standard is a must. But how about 250 million existing vehicles? What are we going to do with those vehicles today? Okay. So first of all, here's a thought. Every car that is flexible fuel already for E85 or is capable of being flexible fuel, by replacing the elastomers, which is going to be the key word, remember this word, elastomers. This is going to be the key word in methanol fuel. You need to replace the elastomers. So the elastomers are all the plastics and rubbers used in the cars, used in the piping system, and used in the gas station dispensing. Methanol penetrates most of these plastics and causes them to expand and become brittle, and causes failure in those O-rings and other seals. Okay. So you need to replace those. But once you replace those and you activate E85 fuel flexibility, you get out-of-the-box M60 support. Okay, so we tried it. We took a flexible fuel car, placed the elastomers, we filled it with M60, and the car thought it was driving on E85. And it behaved perfectly. Now, to upgrade to higher methanol blends, you have to update the spark table. Okay, so in the old days where car used to have carburetors and pipes and all that stuff, it was very hard to convert a car to a new fuel. Today, the car works by a computer. The computer knows everything that's going on in the car, from what's going on inside the engine, to the brakes, to what you drive, to how you change gears. All of that stuff today is done by computer. So you just need to update the software in the computer, and the computer will deal with a new fuel. So the result of that one car we drove was incredibly low tailpipe emissions. I mean, we took the car to 10 different gas stations to do emission testing. And in one of the cases, the guy told us that he thinks that this equipment is broken because he finds it's very hard to read anything coming out of the tailpipe of that car. Okay. We saw 15% improved miles per gallon relative to gasoline on an energy content equivalent. This is key. Okay, a regular gasoline car converted to flexible fuel. We hear here that methanol contains half the energy content of gasoline, but in reality, when you use it in the car, because it burns at 200 degrees lower and get more complete burn, you actually get 15% improvement over the 50%. Does it make sense? So you get 60% or 65%. In other words, 16 gallons of methanol can replace 10 gallons of gasoline, not 20 gallons of methanol. And this, by the way, was also the finding by the Chinese experiment that we've seen in the publication that they've made. Okay, so how do we make this from idea to reality? Now let's talk about the actual items, things that needs to happen. Okay, we need to pass the open fuel standard with the methanol support requirement, which is the House bill versus the Congress versus the Senate bill, which basically give a pass for methanol. The reason we need to do it is because this will ensure not just the car companies, but the entire supply chain actually test their products for methanol. EPA needs to define standards for fuel-grade ethanol, including additives. EPA should relax aftermarket conversion rules in order to create a substantial dent in the price of gasoline. We have to enable conversion of existing cars. Today, you have every time you want to convert a car to a new fuel, every year, make, model, and engine class have to be certified separately, and the process is incredibly onerous and very time-consuming. So it's not practical in reality to do it. There's something called the 1 pound rule, which EPA have given a waiver for ethanol. We would like to think that it should give a waiver to methanol too. We need the UL certification for methanol mixer pump. We talked about elastomers. This is one of the things that they have done in China is they replaced the rubbers in the pumps in order to enable for methanol. And I'm calling here for something a little bit different. You know, in the very, very old day of the internet, DARPA was issuing what today is the .com and the .net, and you know, they were issuing these URLs. Time was not called URLs. They were issuing the names. And then they spun it off and made Network Solutions, which was the first company that enabled you to buy URLs. And what happened is huge explosion in domains and the internet taking off. Okay. Today, the car companies, for the most part, own the software that runs on the computer in your car. They own the tune. Every time you go to a dealer, this tune even if you change something, get overwritten by the default tune that the car companies give. There's an incredible amount of opportunity by opening this tune up to aftermarket people. But you know, so this market already exists today, by the way, but it is sort of an underground market for tunes. We need to make more of an open repository for replacement spark tables called tunes. Okay, so here's the thing. Within 10 to 15 years, this will become a $1 trillion a year industry. Just by trajectorying up the amount of demand growth we are seeing for liquid fuels in the world. Okay, so think about it this way. How many people were sitting in a room where $1 trillion a year industry was created? Well, it was J.D. Rockefeller and Edison. Pretty much that's it. Okay? So this is an historic time here. We are creating something new. Now, there are many conflicting interests of people here in the room. Some people would like to see the feedstock remain cheap. You know, if you are Dow Chemicals, you want natural gas to be very cheap. You don't want other people to use natural gas for anything. Okay? Some people create cars. They don't want to see more complexity. But if we work together, we all have great opportunity to benefit here. And I think this needs to be the operating word here, is how we find ways to work together with the government agencies, with industry, with the auto companies, and with the consumers to create awareness and to enable this transition to happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eyal. We've done a good job here today with our speakers. They've kept us right on time. We've now got about a 15-minute opportunity to take your questions. We have microphones that are available. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. We'll bring you a microphone. Please introduce yourself before you introduce your question. Got a first one right here.
I'm Howard Holm. Dr. Cohn, would you please comment on the difference between the MIT report and the report of IHS to the American Natural Gas Association, which was also discussing the future of natural gas but did not discuss methanol fuel at all?
Well, in what sense would you like me to make the comparison?
Well, why is IHS completely missing the market opportunity that you see?
Well, I can't speak for IHS. I can't speak for why they didn't include it in their study. They came to similar conclusions, by the way, with regard to the availability of methanol and of natural gas and price, cost of making natural gas. I think part of the reason could be that methanol is generally not on the radar screen of people considering alternative fuels, as has been pointed out earlier. I think that's starting to change. I will say that people at IHS have talked to me about methanol. They've expressed interest in it. And I talked about it at a panel at CERAWeek in Houston, which of course is sponsored by IHS. So I think it's a matter of they're getting familiar with it.
IHS also now owns a methanol consulting service and does a newsletter, so they'll be more interested in methanol as the time goes on. I think we have a question in the back.
Hello, my name's Dan Sperling from University of California and the California Air Resources Board. All this talk about new and big opportunities, it just befuddles me. 30 years ago, we used to say exactly the same thing. This is like deja vu all over again. So the question is, you know, I've written books on it. I was on the panel with Dr. Cohn at CERA, and I heard his pitch there as well. So I think this is kind of a love-in so far. I came in a little late, so maybe I heard some contradictory comments, but let me tell you why IHS probably didn't include it, and that is, one, methanol. So I want to say methanol does have some very important advantages: energy security, it's a domestic source, and potentially a good cost advantages, and some engine efficiency advantages, as Dr. Cohn said. But there's no greenhouse gas benefits, no local air pollution benefits for the most part, and we can talk about why that is. Anyone remember MTBE? If MTBE was a challenge, methanol is going to be a bigger challenge from a safety perspective. There's distribution system issues in terms of compatibility, pipeline compatibility, and other compatibility issues. If you look at it in terms of light-duty vehicle market, the consumers are just plain ambivalent, disinterested. It's still a fossil fuel. It's still a combustion engine. Heavy duty, it has some promise, but first of all, it's a very limited market. You know, maybe diesel heavy duty is maybe 20% of the transportation fuels market, and so you can probably get some percent of that, but this is not talking about a, you know, trillion-dollar industry or whatever the numbers were that were being proposed. And in the end, oh, and with heavy duty, there's also the range issue, which is, or the space, it's actually more of a space issue on the trucks. You know, these big long-haul Class 8 trucks, they don't have a lot of space. But, you know, the Class 8, that is the one opportunity probably that really does exist. And so I support Dr. Cohn on that. But in the end, you know, it's promising, it's a good option, but this is not going to transform the industry. In the end, when we look at new fuels, this is the experience over the last few decades, is it really has to be significantly better to have a big impact for people to get, for consumers to get excited about it, for government to get excited about it. And so it has an opportunity as a niche fuel, but, and you know, has some important advantages, but I just can't see it, you know, being anything like what everyone has been saying here this morning.
Well, I think there is some excitement in the room, but let's have our speakers touch on it.
Let me respond to Dan Sperling's comment, because this is kind of a continuation of the dialogue we had at CERAWeek. Dan, I think what's missing in your analysis is a very important factor of cost. Cost is probably the most important factor in determining what alternative fuels can be used. And so we have to really compare the world as it exists and ask, what fuels will have a low enough cost for people to want to use them? That's very important. And I think methanol has a very clear advantage there. And you talked about drivers being ambivalent. I don't think drivers are going to be ambivalent about cost. They want a cheaper solution. That's the most important thing on their mind. You also mentioned that there are no greenhouse gas benefits. I would take issue with that because of the higher efficiency that methanol engines can provide. This can reduce greenhouse gas relative to other internal combustion engines. And I would also take issue with your comment about no air pollution benefits. And as I mentioned in my talk, with regard to heavy-duty vehicles that are powered by diesel, there can be significant air pollution benefits because you have a three-way catalyst, which is a much more effective way of controlling diesel emissions. And as you know, diesel emissions are a real concern. So I would say in your critique, you have not taken these factors into account. And finally, with regard to the space issue on vehicles, as I pointed out in my talk, there is space for larger tanks in heavy-duty vehicles. There's no doubt about that. And the additional weight of the fuel, as I pointed out, is compensated by the fact that you have smaller engines. So we have something new that can actually provide additional benefits. And I would ask you, what's the alternative?
Eyal, you wanted to jump in here too?
Look, in the last 30 years, a lot have happened, okay? The cars you drive today are nothing like the cars that the testing that we've done in California in the 80s were conducted. You know, the Taurus had a regular engine with a carburetor and a completely independent fuel system. Today, all of that stuff is gone. I mean, we have a computer that controls everything. The engine is a closed-loop system. There is no air coming in from anywhere. So you get a substantially improved combustion in the engine chamber just from the technology existing in the cars today. Hence, we're getting this improved fuel economy by energy, which means that you're burning the fuel better and more complete, hence less emission. You're burning it at about 200, we measure this, about 200 degrees less than the burning you get from petroleum, which means less NOx, almost no NOx, almost no CO coming out of the engine. All of that stuff is because of technological advances already in the car today. So a lot of these of your assumptions I have to disagree with, both on the fuel economy and the carbon economy, and particularly on particulate emission. Look, we have to go back to where this Clean Air Act all started. We wanted to improve the air quality in the United States. So let's get back to that. So even if, let's assume the carbon footprint is the same as gasoline, well, it provides much better air for everybody to breathe. I'll sign on that.
You had a comment here as well, and then we've got a question here.
Yeah, I think it's actually, all the points he brought up are worthy of discussion. But what happened in California, in fact, is what the Chinese are doing now. It's pretty much a blueprint. They've rolled it out. What had happened in the late 80s time frame basically was that methanol got much more expensive than gasoline. And why did that happen? It goes back to the concept I presented earlier. It's about deliverability. It's about when methanol starts substituting for energy, the potential for demand growth is enormous, and it exceeds what is typically supplied by the methanol industry in the conventional, let's say, chemical areas. So, but it's clear to me that the costs, projecting oil, projecting gas, even at constant levels, gives you a big driver for the use of methanol, either from natural gas or from coal versus refined products. So as long as we maintain that gap, I believe there will be a lot of user selection towards methanol.
We've got a question here in the second row.
Thank you. Alan Hoffman, Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy at the U.S. Department of Energy. There's been almost no comment on the safe use of large quantities of methanol. That's one of the criticisms that I have read in the past in following this issue. And it's not a matter of drinking it, we all know about that. But if it gets on your skin, it penetrates, and it can be very serious unless it's removed. Can somebody just comment on the safety aspects of a large methanol economy?
Mike, did you want to take some of that?
Maybe I'll try, yeah. Okay. So methanol, there's a lot of things that you don't want to get on your skin. There's a lot of products that you need to be careful with when you handle them. Certainly the Methanol Institute and Methanex spend a lot of time focused on safe handling of methanol. And there's great practice. I know on our website we have an entire manual devoted to safe handling of methanol and getting that information out where it's needed. But there are established ways and procedures. You do need to take caution, and people need to be trained and educated. I know when this program was done in the U.S. in the past, there was a lot of training and education done to make sure that safe handling procedures were in place. And once those are in place, the material is very safely used.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a safer transportation fuel than gasoline. The EPA did a study years ago that showed that the incident of vehicle fires would be reduced by 90% if we fueled all our cars with methanol instead of gasoline. And if you're looking at just the distribution and the handling of methanol at the pump, you practice the same practices with methanol that you do with gasoline. If you get on your hands, soap and water. We had a question back here and then over in this corner.
Bill Holmberg with the American Council on Renewable Energy. How do we build really good working partnership between ethanol and methanol?
Well, I can jump in there. One of the things that Mike showed in his slide presentation was a Lotus car, which is a alcohol flex fuel vehicle capable of operating on either methanol or ethanol fuels. There's an upcoming paper from Lotus and SAE that'll talk about ternary blends of fuels, ethanol, methanol, and gasoline, how you can have various levels of the two alcohols working together in a flex fuel vehicle and find the ideal air-fuel ratio, efficiency, and price. So we think that there is a real compatibility between the two alcohols. And I think Bill, you had a question? Bill Peel?
I just want to make some comments on experience and questions that have been asked. I was working for Arco Chemical at the time. We did methanol blends back in the 1980s. We commercially sold methanol blends out of a number of refineries, not just Arco refineries, but other competitive refineries. And we did it from 81 through 87. And let me tell you, it's not that hard, okay? Everybody makes it sound like a big deal. And the other thing is, we didn't do terminal blending of the methanol blends. We actually did blending at the refineries, and it was shipped through the pipelines for 7 years. Now, the only thing that killed that, or commercially killed it, was the price, as Mark mentioned, the price of crude oil dropped down to $14 a barrel, which, when it got to the point that natural gas was actually more expensive than crude oil on a BTU basis, that took out the incentive to start, move natural gas products in here. But it's really not that hard. We did it successfully for like 7 years. And the handling issue, the exposure issues, and everything else was not a big deal. Like I said, it's actually, we did it through the pipelines. And it just needs to do a little better housekeeping and everything else, but it's not that much of a problem. Though, I mean, like I said, we successfully did it for 7 years, so it's not an issue. If we proved it can be done. I think, and I was, like I said, one of the few people who was actually involved in that department, that business group that supported and distributed methanol blends in the United States. Now, one other comment about MTBE. Though there's a hang-up about MTBE in the U.S., it seems to be fine in the rest of the world. I mean, even in Europe, where they're built on precautionary blends, they reviewed MTBE and said, hey, this is safe, no problem, no issue. And MTBE is growing in the rest of the world, in Asia and all that. So That MTB issue seems to be a U.S. hang-up. It's not a problem in the rest of the world.
Thanks, Bill. We've got to take one more comment, question over here in the corner. I know there are a lot of questions. We've got a full day here, so we'll be sure to get to them all today.
Thank you. My name is Ron Minsk. I'm with Securing America's Future Energy. Dan, you'd mentioned a moment ago that one of the most important things to look at is the cost advantage. But what I want to ask about is the price, not so much the cost. I think sometimes I feel like there's a disconnect. You can produce the stuff perhaps more inexpensively, but if you have an open fuel standard, and all the cars can operate on any fuel, at some point consumers will get smart enough to realize what they're paying. You know, how much energy is in each of the different fuels, and the producers are going to price the fuels accordingly, and people will start buying gasoline, or they'll be buying liquid fuel, not based on how many gallons, but on how many BTUs they're buying. And in Brazil, for instance, we've seen the price of ethanol and of gasoline converge as they've come to flexible fuel vehicles. And in the same sense, you know, the fact that you can, just like the Saudis can produce oil for $10 a barrel doesn't mean they sell it for $10 a barrel. And if you can produce methanol at, let's say, at $2 a gallon on a BTU adjusted basis, or gallons of gasoline equivalent basis, you're not going to sell it for $2 if gasoline is selling for $4. You're going to sell it for $3.99, or you may adjust based on range or whatever. So from the consumer perspective, how does this cost advantage work? It makes the people making it a lot more money, but how does it affect the consumer?
Well, that's a complex economic question, Ron. I don't think I can fully answer it. I can say that at the very least, a lower cost of methanol would prevent the cost of gasoline and diesel from going up, and that's an important thing.
If we persuade the Saudis to charge less for their oil, that's worth it for the U.S. taxpayer.
Thanks, Paul. Annie?
I have to say, wait a second, I want to answer the question. Look, the issue is the amount of feedstock. Okay, so when you look at gasoline, there's only one feedstock, which is petroleum. And as long as petroleum was plentiful, the price was low. As petroleum became harder to find and more costly to produce, the price went up. The exact same thing here. I mean, what happened is now we're looking at plurality of feedstocks. So maybe if you produce it from natural gas, the price goes up, natural gas consumption goes up, the price goes up. Well, maybe you produce it then from municipal waste. Maybe you produce it from biomass. Maybe you produce it from CO2 in the ocean. I don't know. But if you go to plurality of feedstocks, you get many competitors in the market. And if you let them all compete in even footing, access to the market, then eventually what's going to happen is competition will cause the price to go down.
Annie?
This is for Ron and Cohn from IAGS here. You're right. What happens is eventually price will settle at an equilibrium level on a BTU basis. But what will happen is if indeed the industry steps up to the plate and understands there's a huge opportunity here and expands capacity, you will have competition over market share for the transportation fuel market. You will have arbitrage going on among the different commodities, substitutable commodities that can serve that market. And once you have competition over market share, that's done essentially by competition over price, and the price settles to an equilibrium level that's above what the highest cost producer can do. Okay, highest cost certainly to produce methanol from natural gas is higher cost than to lift oil in Saudi Arabia. Okay, so the price of oil at which non-petroleum liquids are competitive, call it $45 to $50 a barrel. So I think what will happen if you see sufficient capacity expansion in non-petroleum liquids, especially methanol, is you're going to drag the price of oil down, not overnight, but you will drag that price of oil down to that equilibrium level. And I think we can all agree that that would be a huge boon to the global economy, beyond the fact that the countries, including the United States, that have tremendous feedstocks for producing methanol will certainly benefit from a jobs, trade deficit, et cetera.
Thanks, Ann. I think this is just the kind of discussion we were hoping to stimulate today, but we do need to take a break. We've got a 15-minute break now, again, sponsored by the Methanex Corporation, so you can thank Mike here for your next cup of coffee. Please give us all a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you.